Good evening, Regional Chair Unica.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you and see you. Thank you.
Perfect.
Thank you, and welcome everyone. Good evening. I'd like to welcome each of you to the third community consultation hosted by Peel Police Services Board, Governance and Human Rights Committee. Before we move further, I'd like to take a minute to do our Indigenous land acknowledgement. We'd like to begin by acknowledging the land on which we gather and which the region of Peel operates is part of the treaty lands and territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit. For thousands of years, Indigenous peoples inhabited and cared for this land. In particular, we acknowledge the territory of the Anishinaabe, Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and Ojibwe Chippewa peoples, the land that is home to the Métis, and most recently, the territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nations, who are direct descendants of the Mississaugas of the Credit. We are grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land, and by doing so, give our respect to its first inhabitants. Thank you. It's truly inspiring to see familiar faces and new participants alike with a shared dedication to improving our community. I want to express my deepest appreciation to all of you for your ongoing commitment and engagement. Your presence at this session, as well as your previous consultations held in September and October of 2023, underscores your unwavering dedication to the betterment of our community. As we convene once again to discuss the critical topics of police governance and human rights, it is important to reflect on the progress we've made and the challenges that lie ahead. Your insights and feedback from previous sessions will continue to help shape our approach and priorities. Tonight, we continue this vital dialogue building upon the foundation laid by our previous discussions. Your input remains paramount as we seek to refine strategies, address concerns, and implement meaningful reforms. I want to assure you that this is not the end of our efforts, but rather another step forward in our journey toward positive change. As we move forward, your continued participation will be invaluable in shaping the future of our policing and human rights in our community. Thank you once again for your dedication and community. Let's work together to create a safer, more just, and more inclusive society for all. Welcome and thank you for being here. And with that, let's begin tonight's consultations with our first presenter. I believe our first presenter is virtual. Samir Muscati from Human Rights Watch, sharing his insights and recommendations regarding disability rights and policing, drawing from their 2021 report. Samir, I'll turn it over to you. I just want to let you know you have 5 minutes for your time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone. Hi, everyone. My name is Samir Muscati. I'm the acting deputy director for disability at Human Rights Watch, an independent, non-government, non-profit organization dedicated to the promotion and protection of human rights in more than 100 countries around the world, including Canada. Our Disability Rights Division conducts research and advocacy on the rights of people with disabilities, including people with mental health conditions. We are here today to showcase an alternative model for community-based mental health crisis response. So why is this important? Systemic inequities, coercive practices, and police violence remain globally pervasive problems that put people experiencing a mental health crisis at particular risk. This is especially true for Indigenous, Black, and racialized groups, and two-spirit, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer plus people. The common practice in Canada, as in other countries, of sending police as first responders, including for so-called wellness checks, increases the risk of injury or death. Even non-police responses to people in crisis can excessively pathologize people and lead them into coercive or forced treatment. In November, along with our partner, Gerstein Crisis Center, we released a model for community-based mental health crisis response. The case study can serve as a roadmap to support people experiencing a mental health crisis without resorting to policing, involuntary hospitalization, and forced treatment. The case study, which incorporates guidelines from the World Health Organization, lays out a rights-respecting and community-based alternative to over-medicalized and police-led responses. It provides a detailed description of the center's approaches and includes lessons learned and good practices from decades of mental health support. The case study is part of an initiative by Human Rights Watch to promote solutions-oriented approaches as a way to encourage governments and community-based organizations to develop policies and practices that respect human rights and comply with the principles in the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. We're also sharing this practice in other parts of the world, including in New York. I'd like to invite my colleague, Elaine Amsterdam, Gernstein's Director of Municipal and Community Partnerships, to speak.
Hi.
We can hear you, Elaine.
Okay, thank you.
You could go ahead, Elaine.
Oh, sorry, has Samer spoken?
Yes, he's already spoken.
Oh, pardon me, I hadn't realized that. Okay, so thank you very much and good evening. Gerstein Center is a community-based mental health crisis service. It is non-medical and not a police hybrid model. Teams are made up of highly skilled and trained community mental health workers. All services are free and available to adults 16 and over living in the City of Toronto. We're also the anchor partner for the Toronto Community Crisis Service in the Downtown East and will be expanding further this coming summer. Gerstein has been providing community-based crisis intervention and response since 1989, and for the most part with little need to engage police services. Initiatives include a 24/7 crisis line, mobile crisis teams, short-stay crisis beds, mental health and justice safe beds, and a dedicated substance use and follow-up team. We have street outreach teams in 2 high-needs neighborhoods in the downtown core, a dedicated phone line for businesses and residents in those areas, as well as crisis teams on site at 2 Toronto Public Library locations. Gerstein also has a crisis worker co-located at the 911 call center, taking mental health crisis calls diverted directly from 911. Crisis workers also de-escalate some callers in preparation for police responses where these are required. Most recently, we've signed on to the 988 National Suicide Intervention Line. Gerstein provides a low barrier and no wrong door service with multiple access points. Many partners have also stepped up to collaborate and strengthen pathways to other needed community mental health services, including culturally specific supports. That said, our system is not operating at capacity that it needs to be, as long wait lists for assessment and treatment would attest. People need to be able to access mental health supports where and when they need it. The earlier in the crisis, the more options are available. Without a timely response, crisis can escalate and become an emergency where opportunities for resolution become more limited and choices narrow. Equitable access to healthcare is a fundamental human right, yet Black, Indigenous, racialized, 2S LGBTQIA+ communities and those living with mental health and substance use needs have been telling us for decades that access to healthcare and the social determinants of health has not been equitably available to them. Our most recent data over the course of the pandemic fully support that these inequities continue to flourish and continue to negatively impact health outcomes. We also know these same communities are more likely to be over-policed and overrepresented in our criminal systems. People are less likely to talk about their mental health or seek help if they're further stigmatized by incorrect associations with violence. They are less likely to seek help if they are more likely to receive a criminal response rather than a health one, and more likely to receive a coercive response rather than one that by intention is there to support their dignity, human rights, and choices. Gerstein Crisis Center believes strongly in a model in which the earliest intervention for mental health needs is provided by a mental health worker rather than the police service.
Elaine, my apologies. I just want to let you know you have 30 seconds remaining.
All right. Policing is a purpose-built crisis response model that utilizes apprehension as a key tool. Criminal responses cannot begin to address what's needed for health improvement. Community crisis response is a purpose-built health response model that emphasizes intervention, support, and service connection. Our communities are facing complex health issues, and solutions will require innovative models that work collaboratively across jurisdictions and all 3 levels of government. We at Gerstein Center and Human Rights Watch want to help improve health outcomes by changing this experience and providing a model of 24/7 mental health care and crisis support that is community-based and rights-respecting. Thank you.
Thank you so much to you, Elaine and Samer. Thank you so much for your deputation. I'm going to now turn it over to my fellow board members for questions. Mr. Atia?
Thank you very much to both of you for that presentation. The discussion of mental health and policing has been a very important one across policing and here in Peel as well. And I just, before I offer my or share my questions, I just want to share that I do sit on the board of Human Rights Watch Canada, but I have no role in this research or any of the research that HRW does. So I just wanted to disclose that for the public. My first question is, you've touched on it, Samer, I think quickly, and I've read through your report. It was shared with us today as best as I can. Wellness checks. I mean, that is something that we do. I understand we do here at Peel Police wellness checks, and you've described it as high risk, Samer, and the report says that the wellness checks are not necessarily the most suitable approach to responding to crisis calls. Can you elaborate on this? Why do you say that? What are the lessons learned from your research?
Thank you, Ahmed. I appreciate the question. So the challenge with wellness checks, obviously, is you're already dealing with somebody who's in crisis, who's already dealing with a lot, and to have somebody who's armed, who's approaching them, even with good intentions, risks escalating the situation and risks, putting them on further edge. So I think what we've highlighted with the approach at Gernstein, is sending people who are not in uniform, not armed, who have sort of oftentimes lived experience, who can de-escalate the situation. We're approaching it from sort of more of a rights-based perspective as opposed to a security sort of risk, can generate better outcomes. So essentially, that's where what the thinking is that you already have quite an explosive situation. Adding an armed officer in the mix will not necessarily sort of benefit the person. And also, it's not a good position for the officers to be in as well. This is a very sort of risky situation in terms of providing the support that a person needs at a time of crisis. And officers, despite the training, I mean, this is not their role. The role is not to be mental health experts. The role is not to be a crisis support. So it's sort of not necessarily a great fit for the role of the police officers to be engaging in this when we can use community-based services in a way that reduces that risk and benefits the community and puts the person really at the heart of the situation. I'm not sure if my partner Elaine wanted to elaborate on that.
Sorry, go ahead, Elaine. Do you have anything to add?
No, I really think that's perfect. We were saying before that one is a criminal response, in essence, a safety response. The other is a health response. And that fact and that kind of interaction will change inherently by the two not uniformed police showing up that really are there to respond to a person's health needs and connect them to services that will lead to better health outcomes later on.
Okay, no, I understand now. Thank you. Your report talks about one of the recommendations is a consent-based approach in the response to a crisis call. And I'm trying to wrap my mind around how when a family calls 911 because they feel that their loved one who has a mental health crisis is either putting themselves at risk or a family member at risk or someone at risk, and so they feel it warranted a 911 call. How do you actually accomplish a consent-based approach when a police officer arrives when the person's in crisis?
Well, I can tell you, we have crisis workers co-located up at the 911 call center. Consent-based approach can be really straightforwardly and informally asked. It sounds like you were having a very rough time tonight. We have a crisis worker sitting right here. Would it be helpful if I put them on the phone with you? It really is as simple as explaining who is there, what they can do, and passing the phone over, calling somebody else in. Clarifying your role goes a long way to really helping people feel secure and confident in who's coming out.
I see. My last question is, your report talks about situation tables, and I understand, your organization, I think I understood that you play a role in these situation tables. Here in the Peel region, we also have situation tables, and Peel Police is very invested in that process, and they sit at that table. Just curious, want to learn about your experience. How successful have they been in the Toronto region in accomplishing the goals of the situation table, which is moving someone from their interactions with police to getting them the support upstream support services that they need. Can you tell us about your experience?
Yeah, Gerstein has sat at 2 situation tables since their inception. I mean, really, one of the reasons people come forward or names are put forward to the situation table is because no other services, including the police service, has been able to meet their need. Often there's a lot of relationship building. People are our teams are going out 3, 4, 5 times to develop a relationship, make a connection, find that person in the community, see what they're needing, de-escalate, and connect them to other services. We have been a lead in the mental health response in the downtown core for many years in that regard, and I think have done very well in connecting services and helping people avoid unnecessary interactions with hospital and with the criminal system.
Okay, and finally, just a quick question. In the last year or two that your organization has worked directly with Toronto Police on responding to mental health calls with a crisis worker instead of a police officer, the model that you've established, do you have a percentage of how many calls have been responded to without a police officer?
I can tell you the opposite of that for the Toronto Community Crisis Service, something like 2% of the calls have required a police response. It's been very, very small. A lot of those calls will come in because 911 may be getting 4 or 5 calls for the same occurrence. And so those occurrences get different responses and sometimes end up with a number of police and community workers on site simultaneously. But vast majority, I mean, listen, police data itself will tell you that more than 80% of the mental health calls that they attend are situations that have no occurrence of violence. That tells us that more than 80% of mental health calls require not a police presence, but a community one and a health one.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate your time. Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you so much to both of you for making time and speaking tonight. Thank you so much. Next, we have, thank you. And next, I believe we have an in-person speaker. So Mr. Omar Zia, he's the chair of the Muslim Employees Association of Peel, Muslims Identifying Students and the Impacts of Policing in the Community. Welcome, Mr. Omar. You're just right in the center. And then you'll see in front of you, you'll see a button that's, thank you, Chief.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, perfect. And so just like the other deputation, you have 5 minutes, and I'll try and give you like a 30-second warning. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. So first, thank you for inviting me to this forum to present this information to you. I hope that's beneficial to you as well as myself in gathering it. So just a bit about myself and where I'm located. So the principal at the Woodland Secondary School, which is at Dundas, Arundel Station Road in Mississauga. I'm the chair of the Muslim Employees Association of Peel, as well as the chair of the Muslims Educators Network of Ontario. And within my current role, I'm also the EDI rep, or Equity, Diversity, Inclusion Officer rep for Peel Chapter, Ontario Principals Council. I'm also the chair of the Secondary School Principals Association for Peel as well. But what I'm doing here tonight is actually just sharing with all of us here the voices of our students, the Muslim identifying students. And that's my purpose of being here with you today. As an administrator in a school building and as a member of the Peel District School Board, student voice, community voice is what matters a lot. It really guides the work that we do. And I hope that by sharing it here, it will help influence and guide some of the work that you do in the future moving forward. So a quarter of our students in the Peel District School Board are Muslim identifying. That's from 2018. And then the other stats demonstrate, this is from Stats Canada, their census data, that demonstrates that the population of Muslim identifying folks are increasing as in Peel, and you can see here that difference between over the last 10 years. Also, just for our information, that in 2023, we did pass the Affirming Muslim Identity and Dismantling Islamophobia strategy in Peel. Just January 15th, a month ago, I guess, was our official launch, and the document's available to the public on the public-facing website. So I interviewed and I sent a survey out to our Muslim Student Association executive members. So the 30-some-odd secondary schools, we had some of the executive members of our MSAs respond to the survey. And so we have 56 responses from the vast majority of responses. And we see here that this question, do you see that Peel Regional Police Officers are supportive of Muslim identifying youth And we see that the majority are saying that they do not feel that way. They're not feeling that sense of support from PRP officers that they interact with within the region. And do they feel that PRP officers are actively preventing Islamophobic incidents within the community? And overwhelming saying no, but of course there are about a third that say yes. So there is obviously a positive side that there are some of our youth who are seeing that PRP officers are and do have the ability to support and to combat Islamophobia that's occurring in communities within which they reside. Do they feel that PRP officers threaten or intimidate Muslim-identifying youth? And the vast majority say no, they do not. They feel comfortable and safe around our officers, which is a very important element. At the same time, about a quarter are thinking that they do feel some form of threat or intimidation. And I want to mention this is not accusatory in any way to our wonderful PRP officers we need and who are dedicated, and we rely upon them every day to keep our communities safe and functional. But oftentimes this is a perception that youth face, and so oftentimes perception becomes the lived reality of some of our students and some of our youth in the community. So just being aware of this information will help us understand why it's so important for PRP to consider outreach towards the Muslim-identifying youth in our communities. Evaluate experience with PRP officers as Muslim-identifying youth residing in Peel, and so we see a wide spectrum here, but the vast majority get in the middle in terms of being where they are in terms of the interaction with PRP officers or PRP in general. So I've asked them, like, let's not complain, let's also come up with solutions, and let's see where we can actually support our system, our community as a whole. So here are some ideas that have been shared from our students. So great representation of Muslim-identifying police officers in PRP, specifically hijab-wearing police officers. And I'd like to mention that in our own board, we are using Section 14 of the Human Rights Code of Ontario to specifically target hiring of teachers and staff who represent the community, specifically our more marginalized, historically marginalized communities, Black and Indigenous educators. So something for us to consider, I'd ask for consideration, is that the same section of the code could be used by PRP to consider implementing to hire more Muslim-identifying police officers within its force, specifically hijab-wearing police officers. The PRP spreading awareness of Islamophobic incidents, and the good news are on their social media platforms as well to show their support for the Muslim community. We oftentimes do see politicians, tweeting things out. I do see the PRP does follow myself on Twitter, so I know that they have a presence on social media. It'd be amazing if they could also share some of the incidents where they either resolve or they're stepping in supporting or attending some of the good news items that exist within the Muslim community around Peel. Mandatory education for police officers on Islam as a faith, on Muslim majority cultures such as South Asian and Arab, and common discrimination that Muslims face, so that when they are interacting with the Muslim identifying public, that they're able to support them, understand where they're coming from, and have that sense of empathy towards them. And part of that means also visiting mosques. Their mosques do have open doors for the entire community. It's not a closed, they're not really closed centers. They are designed to interact with the community and to give a space for PRP and PRP officers to interact with the community, but also having officers or PRP personnel actually attend mosques and share information about what the efforts are of PRP to support Muslim-identifying folk within our community and to combat Islamophobia. And oftentimes, if we do see PRP officers around, we feel safe. I know as a principal of a school, when I was I was a night school administrator for about 5 years at Bramley Secondary School, and having our PRP officers present made a big difference in terms of myself and the students feeling safe and secure in the building, especially at night hours when it's night school. So we can imagine that with the issues that are going on around the world, the sense of fear that some of our community face, especially youth. The youth, we had a small commemoration at my school regarding January 29th, which was an anniversary of what happened in Quebec in 2017. And so it was just important for students to feel that they had a sense of safety and security, because oftentimes our youth feel afraid to go to mosques. And so if they feel that the police are around there, they see their presence in a protective and safe and secure manner, they would feel more comfortable going to their places of worship and their places of community building. It would be great. I know that we do have a protocol regarding interaction between PRP and schools, came out in 2021. A lot of that has to do with our current situation with our ministry directives, and we are working, I suppose, on that document. But it would be amazing to see PRP back in schools giving workshops to all students, in particular Muslim students who are facing racism and Islamophobia, helping them understand how they can respond to discrimination. If not in schools, then perhaps in mosques and our community centers. But connecting with Muslim youth in schools, listening to their voices in schools, Oftentimes, miscommunication fuels the fear of police. So connecting with youth and showing how police protects and what they actually do in their day-to-day job to protect and keep our communities safe will certainly fill and bridge that gap. I know.
Sorry to interrupt. You have 30 seconds.
Okay, I'm going to with you the next Pavel. I don't have to present. I apologize. Okay, anything better that they can actually do to that PRP and PRP officers can do to support and connect with students. So attending youth events, right? So I put Muslim Fest up there. That's the community event that I'm part of. I've been part of since about 2000, and then it's been going on for just over 20 years. That's the place where PRP officers are present. But it'd be great if they could be present almost as a pavilion to actually share what they do and how they can support the community. MIST is an interscholastic tournament that happens at York University, University of Toronto during March break, although this year it's actually happening in May because of Ramadan. But attending some of the Ramadan iftars that happen at mosques or even our school systems, as well as attending Friday night. Oftentimes Friday night events do happen in mosques in the region, and perhaps even celebrating Eid with us as well. And just the last point there is that demonstrating their sincere desire to protect all people is needed. This is something that kids and students need to be able to feel, that when they see a police officer, rather than feeling any sort of sense of fear, they feel a sense of reassurance that they've got my back, they're here to help us, they're here to support our community, and regardless of whatever identity I have, that the police are there to support me. And just one small note, although I am speaking about Muslim identifying youth here as a principal, I do represent students of all sorts of backgrounds. And so, we have a lot of students in my particular school who are Black and Muslim who share the intersection of racism, anti-Black racism, as well as Islamophobia. We do have a few students who are queer and Muslim, so representing that intersection as well. So the students need to feel that sense of safety around them as well. So thank you. I apologize for going over time.
No, it was great. Thank you. My apologies. We just tried to speak, but
I'll talk too fast.
it was, we really do appreciate you coming and sharing this information, most definitely. I'm going to open it up to our fellow board members. So Mr. Len Carby.
Awesome. Thanks, Omar, for the presentation. Quite informative. Just one small question. Where you highlighted the sense of lack of support by Muslim identifying youth, one of the points you made to explain is it could be just a perception. Have we done any kind of research to figure out what may be leading to that perception?
I don't have any research specifically about that. What could be leading to that perception? I mean, there's a lot of, from the other responses, what I would say probably the most recent information that I have from research here is that there have been a number of protests that have been going on in the community probably around the whole world, but even in Peel as well, regarding the ongoings that occurred after October 7th, 2023. Oftentimes our youth do not feel supported by Peel police. They feel that there's misinformation about what's happened, and that somehow they believe that Peel police officers responding to situations believe the misinformation and propaganda rather than being there on a non-judgmental basis to support the community, support the kids. I'm speaking directly from the experiences of the students at the Woodland Secondary School who had a number of walkouts in the fall.
Great, thank you.
Thank you so much. Mr. Atia?
Thank you. Through the chair. This line on preventing Islamophobic incidents, it's an interesting stat. I mean, for police to prevent Islamophobia, it's very challenging. I mean, preventing any crime is challenging. Do the youth, you think, feel that officers are not able to recognize when incidents that are Islamophobic, that are motivated by Islamophobia are happening? Is that, and so they're not being addressed? Is that the, what do you think they actually mean when they talk about prevention? And then I have a follow-up.
Okay, thank you. So from what I have from the responses of students is that there is a perception or that PRP and PRP officers do not understand what Islamophobia looks like, sounds like, and feels like in their experiences, whether in the school or in the community. Some of them could be something as simple as microaggressions. Hijab wearing female students walking through a mall and they get something said to them or they're bullied in the community, and perhaps there might be an officer around but it's not aware of the fact that bullying happened or that a microaggression was even said. So for that training to happen for officers would, I think, go a long way. I believe also that when it comes to our PRP officers being a preventive or proactive measure, presence speaks volumes. I know that as a principal, if I'm in the hallway, there's a lot less chance something bad's going to happen. If I walk around class to class and do a rendition of the code of conduct, I know the students are paying attention to when I'm speaking to them. When police officers in a public forum, whether at a community center, at the mall, if possible, to come to the school, to attend mosques, and address the fact that they recognize Islamophobia and microaggressions bullying exists for Muslim youth, and that they are more than happy to support and helping our youth understand where they can report, how they can report when the incidents happen to them, and what the follow-up would be. So they had that sense of, okay, I can do something, and I'm going to report something, and something's going to happen because of it. Oftentimes, they don't feel that they will get the support if they report, or they feel something bad might happen to them. That if I make this report, I'll be blamed for it.
Okay. Follow up. Prevention. There's two things that come to my mind. There's deterrence, and then there's education, right? On Islamophobia, on hate crimes, on the consequences of committing a hate crime. Do you think you mentioned some examples, but are there others? Are there other examples that you think Peel Police can do on either of those?
Yes, I believe that if Peel, let's say, for example, that there is a conference where, for example, that the Peel Police or PRP itself holds an anti-Islamophobia conference and invites members of the community to share and explain to not just officers, but members of the public to come listen to what Islamophobia again looks like, sounds like, and feels like for our kids, for our communities around Peel, and what steps they could take to prevent those things from happening. I think that Peel Police doing something like that would show support for the Muslim community, but also show support that we do not stand as a community, but I think as PRP does not stand for racism or hate crimes to exist. I believe also the communication going out to families about how to report a hate crime. There's a lack there. If I look at some of the information, NCCM and the reports that they have put out, NCCM, for those who are not aware, National Canadian Council of Muslims, they are the civil liberties organization, and so they've shared information through their reports that a number of members of the public are not aware, the Muslim identifying public are not aware of how to make reports when they experience hate crimes, or what would happen if they even reported that hate crime. So, for example, if there's a leaflet or pamphlet going out or information online that was available, that was being pushed out through a wide variety of media, social media or media itself, to families to help them feel that sense of support and awareness. And because I'm coming from a place of faith that's not just for the Muslim community, but really the entire, all human beings, really. We're talking about human rights for everybody. We're talking about equity for all and anti-racism for all of us to make our communities safe and secure.
I'd have to say, notwithstanding the concerns that the youth have flagged through the survey, but the slides on intimidation and experience are very positive. They reflect positive experiences, and often, they're based on, I'm sure they're based on actual interactions with officers, and so that was interesting to see. You talk about spreading awareness and for the officers or for the police service to promote the good work it does in addressing calls related to hate or Islamophobia. And you talk about social media. Do you have a sense whether I know Peel Police is on Twitter, I know it's on Facebook, but I'm actually dating. I feel like I'm not on social media where the youth are on, so I can't tell. But can you tell, as a principal, are Peel Police actually reaching youth through the right platforms?
To be honest with you, no. Students do use Instagram. They use TikTok. Those are the two main platforms that they would use, where police could have access to them. At my own school, when we want to get messaging out to students, we put on Instagram. We know that they get right away. So anytime there's deadlines coming up, university applications going on, advertisement for a dance happening, it's always on Instagram. We personally avoid TikTok because it's actually banned within our board. You can't actually access it unless you've got a VPN, but Instagram is available to students, and a lot of students do access. In fact, a lot of the parent community accesses Instagram as well.
So you find it a successful platform to reaching your students?
Absolutely, and the board uses Instagram as well.
Okay, and then you talk about some recommendations about the policing in schools, and this is a very we've paused that, and it's a very debated issue. And it's interesting to hear as a principal your views on that and the success stories. I don't have much of a question, but I'm happy we hear different views on this. So I thank you for sharing those experiences, because it informs our decision making. Obviously, this decision is with the school board, and I know the chief always says Peel Police is ready to support the board whenever they decide what they want that to look like.
For sure. And some of the positive interactions you mentioned earlier, and that's oftentimes where it does happen, where where the MPU officer program existed, and we had a lot of positive interactions. I know I'm probably speaking at a board. Hope my director is not watching this right now, but we did have a lot of positive interactions with the MPU officer program. A lot of students did get support through Peel Youth Village. There was an opportunity through the YIPI program for students to be involved, and so there were a lot of positive interactions for sure through that program. But I just want to mention as well, you mentioned about how to reach youth. Again, Friday nights at mosques around Peel is a very, very active night. And I myself used to run a program called Dean for Teens out of Al-Falah Islamic Center in Oakville. And this is a place where PRP officers were able to come and give a small 5-10 minute presentation. And just their presence of being there, this is another avenue to reach youth. Oftentimes there's basketball games going on, video game competitions, and just lectures that are happening for communities. So it's definitely on Friday night. It's a great opportunity for PRP to be able to reach out to communities and youth to be able to reach them, play with them, hang out with them, and also answer their questions. And again, increase that feeling of camaraderie and support.
Okay, and I'll just lastly say, like I 2 years ago taught a workshop in the YIPI program, and I was, you commented on YIPI, and I was surprised to see how many diverse students there were in the program, including Muslims. And it's a very small program, so unfortunately, I'm sure the demand is, we can't respond to the demand, but just as in Woodlands, for example, do our students exposed to YIPI, do they get, it's kind of unrelated. I'm just curious how much it's promoted within the school system.
Yeah, so the email just came out, I think, a week and a half ago. So we through our guidance department, we keep an eye on which students are interested in going into a job or a career in law enforcement. And so we actually target those students because we know that's a very small number of students who are accepted into that program. And prior to being at the Woodlands, when I was at Streetsville and at TL Kennedy and Jane Augustine, I was a guidance counselor there. So whenever we actually look forward to the memo coming out so we could target our specific students who are interested in the YIPI program and get them on board with that.
That's very good to hear. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you for tonight.
for sure.
Thank you so much for coming. That was great. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Next, we also have another presentation in person. It's Mr. Mohammed Hashim and Anna Maria Enanjor. I hope I said that correctly. It's on Canadian Race Relations Foundation, Human Rights, Hate Crimes, and Law Enforcement. So just as you take a seat, you'll see the red button. That's what you would press to speak. And when you're not speaking, just turn that off. I want to remind you, you have 5 minutes, and I'll try my best to give you 30 seconds warning. Thank you.
I'll try my best to stay on time then. So thank you very much, Madam Chair, Rob, Len, Amit, nice to see you all. Anthony, I don't know who you are. Hello to you too.
Taking up our time.
Sorry. My name is Mohammed Hashim. I'm the Executive Director of the Canadian Race Relations Foundation.
My name is Anna Maria Enanjor. I'm counsel for the Canadian Race Relations Foundation.
And one of Canada's leading experts on race and justice. I come here with a deep history in connection to the Peel Police. Many years ago, I sat there in complete frustration watching Sandra Solomon rip up a Quran in Darul Tawheed Mosque and to face no charges, not even an incitement to hate, even though thousands of people shared those videos and nothing came about that. I've attended protests after protests for folks like Jermaine Carby and others. I now sit as the head of a federal crown corporation, where the vice chair of my board is Orlando Bowen, who was brutally beaten by the Peel Police, sued him, and he sued the police, and now, but his career as a football player was ended because of that interaction. I helped bury Ijaz Chaudhry after he was killed by the Peel Police. I carried his dead body. I sat in his family's living room and I told the mother of his children that we would fight for justice, and for many years it's felt like that has been a promise unfulfilled. So I'm here with my own voice, but I hope that you'll carry the memories of those people and their voices in what I'm about to say. So the Peel Police can and should be proud of some of the work it's doing in the area of human rights, undoubtedly. I know from my own experience, the Peel Police has some of the best training and proactive practices available in the country to address hate crimes. I co-chair a national task force with the RCMP on hate crimes, where we work with police from policing and prosecution service from across the country. So I know Of the 170 police of jurisdiction, roughly 20 of them have hate crime specialties, and Peel Police is definitely on the top of that list of people who are doing this work well. But there are issues that we want to address. So I'm going to kick it over to Anna Maria.
I'll briefly outline what we characterize as the problem, which is ongoing human rights issues that face racialized communities in the Peel region. I say briefly because of our time limit, but please know that our written submissions extensively go into the data that is the foundation for our observations and commentary. There are two main problems that persist in the Peel region with respect to racialized communities and human rights in policing. The first is a concerning trend regarding use of force incidents. Members of the Peel region's Black and racialized communities remain overrepresented in police use of force incidents at troubling rates. In 2023, Peel Regional Police released a report entitled Committed to Action Progress Report, Human Rights and Use of Force. The data from this report reveals an alarming disparity in the use of force, with Black individuals being the highest of those disproportionately impacted by use of force. Despite an overall decrease that should be applauded in use of force incidents by Peel Regional Police, the percentage of increase involving Black individuals has increased, signaling systemic issues. Black people in Peel region make up only 9.8% of the residential population, while incidents of use of force have grown to 34.3%, representing a 3% increase since 2020. And indeed, there is an increase, as our table shows. Well, it's not our table, it's the Peel Regional Police table, but we've excerpted it for the slide, shows a positive increase in use of force percentage composition by all racial groups except for white. Now, there's a caveat that's embedded in this, which is that the data collection varies with respect to East and Southeast Asian and South Asian groups, because there was a change in the way in which those groups were classified. So it's difficult to know whether the growth among those groups are due to increased policing, increased use of force, or just a difference in the way that these groups are documented by police officers. The data recorded also illustrates a 12% overall use of force incident involving people in crisis, a uniquely vulnerable population group. As well, we see the persistence of racial profiling in the region of Peel, with some notable incidents in 2022 and 2023. These incidents, particularly those that garnered media coverage, publicized litigation, and scathing judicial findings, shock the conscience of the public. These occurrences erode the public's trust in policing. Reestablishing that trust will require more than just implementing an anti-racism program. It will require the adoption of serious accountability measures that impose significant and serious consequences for the worst offenders. Those officers whose conduct is racially motivated, have been found to have been racially motivated. They have no place in this community. And now for the solutions.
So there's three solutions that we're looking to bring to your attention. One is obviously, there's three over here. So rejecting a one-size-fits-all, and then adopting a community-focused approach to racial bias training, and then the third one is implementing data-driven individual and institutional accountability measures. I can get into them further in the questions that you have afterwards, if you like, if we run out of time. But first is just accepting the fact that different communities need different types of policing. So we know PRP must acknowledge the impact of historic over-policing on certain communities and develops tailored strategies, including disengagement when necessary. A nuanced understanding of the impact of racism and policing on community members, a sense of safety has yet to be integrated into PRP's approach to combating systemic racism. PRP's 2020 to 2023 strategic plan appears to operate under the assumption that an increase in police presence in priority populations is universally beneficial and desirable for the promotion of public safety. This approach fails to recognize the role that the historic over-policing of certain communities, namely Black communities, has played in the creation and maintenance of the vulnerability that caused these communities to not be designated as priority. Black and other racialized communities are subject to a disproportionate amount of policing, while the objective of policing is to serve and protect. The reality among visible minorities, racialized communities, is that Peel Police often instills fear, trauma, and humiliation. I know we're running out of time, so I'm gonna maybe just jump over to the next couple, and then we can go into a few things. One is adopting a community-focused approach to racial bias training. So accountability requires mechanisms that demonstrate a commitment to change, not only at the institutional level, but at the individual officer level as well, by ensuring that racial bias training is a meaningful experience rather than a check-boxing exercise. And I know from police trainers how some of these sessions have been going. I think there's a different approach that needs to be done. But the third, we have a written submission on this, but I would like you to take a look at the immersion program from Montreal Police, which has new recruits going into a 2-week immersion program into the community before they actually hit the streets. It's something that you might want to consider, but there's others that we would like to maybe we can talk to you about afterwards. But the third one is there's actually a really big opportunity that's coming up with the Universal Crime Reporting System. You want to cut me off? Okay, go ahead.
If you could just kind of wrap it up, that would be great. Thank you.
So the Universal Crime Reporting System of the UCR 2.5 is being implemented right now. I'm sure folks are aware of that. It's with Stats Canada, and it's the way the government receives all the information. I know that right now the Peel Police is sitting at the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police round. They have an operationalizing table around education and training for that new system to be implemented. But with that new system being implemented, that is going to now force police to be able to put in officer perceived and individual and even or offender or victim perceived race. So they can identify better, and with that creates huge opportunity for there to be institutional responses. So, for example, if an officer, you knew that people are being pulled over at a high level from a certain number of officers, instead of waiting for a incident to be reported, that a high threshold or a threshold could be set that would automatically create a review of the officer's conduct based on that, which I think is when you create automatic reviews, it creates a sense of deterrence and the officers to be able to say, okay, here, if I know I'm going to go like too far into going in a certain way, and I'm not saying all officers are racist or any of that, but some of them, may just be doing things in a way that they may not. You want to cut me off? Okay. I'm sure there's going to be many questions, so we can get into that. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Hashim, and Anna Maria, thank you so much as well for your time. And I hate being the timekeeper. I apologize. I know it's, but we do value your time and that you've come and shared. I'm going to turn it over to my fellow board colleagues. So Mr. Len Carby, you had a question?
Yes, good to see you, Mohammed. I know it seems a little rushed to get, this is a lot to be able to receive, but the point of these consultations is more for us to receive.
Sure, yeah.
So we will, take the recommendations and kind of integrate them into some of the overall recommendations that are being addressed by Peel Police. But you and I have also sat together on the Anti-Racism Advisory Committee, where you are aware, and for the benefit of the public, a whole series of recommendations that the PRP have agreed to for implementation. Would you say these recommendations you have brought here are included in that? Because that is supposed to represent a comprehensive list of recommendations for PRP to address some of the same issues you're speaking of. Would you say that the list of recommendations there would need a second look to include these, or would you say these are included in the recommendations that have been adopted by ARAC and the PRP for implementation?
So two things. One is I sat on that committee for about a year and a half or so, and then honestly, because of scheduling, I couldn't continue. So I don't know where the status of, or the latest that it left it at. So I'm not sure what recommendations made it through that or not. I know that the automatic individual review portion is something that is definitely downstream. That I don't think that the committee has the visibility of what's coming through from the UCR 2.4, 2.5 system on Stats Canada. I don't think the committee has the visibility of what that records management system adaptation timeline is going to look like. So I don't think that those pieces are there. But I do think that the individual, do you want to just jump in?
Sure, yeah. So one thing that is new and that builds on the work that is being done by that committee is the use of data not only for systemic reforms and the development of broader policies, but also specifically for the purpose of evaluating individual officer performance. So my understanding is that currently Peel Regional Police has indicated that it will not use race-based data in evaluating and conducting performance reviews of individual officers, and the data will only be used in the aggregate to inform broader policies. And what we're saying is that that's a missed opportunity to use the tools and the data as behavior correction and to create incentives for more appropriate behavior and to draw each individual officer's own consciousness towards this phenomenon that exists that we see is happening at the aggregate level, but not only emphasizing the aggregate and the general and the collective, but also each individual officer's accountability.
Awesome. And a follow-up question, which stems from something you mentioned, not being aware of where we're at in the process. Do you have any comments around what PRP could do better around communicating those recommendations to the broader community so that there's awareness of the recommendations that are being implemented by PRP?
I honestly don't know of all the recommendations that are coming out of it, so I'm not too sure how to communicate that. But do you have any additions to that?
Well, I think the best way of communicating is through results. So the community will see when numbers start falling. Right now, numbers are rising, and that is their lived experience. And so it's important to continually go back to the drawing board, revisit recommendations, and apply data-driven approach to policy reform and individual officer discipline in order to curb behaviors in such a way that it will have an impact, that people will notice it. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, this isn't a PR stunt. This is about results on the street. It's about people protect them, and the only way to properly communicate that and authentically communicate that is through the results and the success of the programs that are in place, and that's shown by the numbers, the decrease in use of force incidents, the decrease in overrepresentation, and the increase in confidence in policing in neighborhoods.
Great. Thank you so much for your responses.
Thank you.
Mr. Atia?
Thank you for coming today. I have a few questions. As you can tell, I like to ask questions. So, and I did have an opportunity to read the report right before I came that you sent, the detailed report. So some of my questions are more based on the report, and you may not have commented on them. So, but first of all, I'd like to say, thank you for the invitation when CRF organized the Globe and Mail Hate Crimes Canada conference, and you invited me on behalf of the board, and it was a very useful event a few years ago. In your report that you sent to us, it says that PRP's, I'm going to read it to you, PRP's 2020-2023 strategic plan appears to operate under the assumption that an increase in police presence in priority populations is universally beneficial and desirable for the promotion of public safety. Are you in a position now to offer more insight, like why you think, why our strategic plan why you've interpreted it that way?
Sorry, I had just had to orient myself
No
in the
problem,
report. Because the strategic plan outlines strategies for further engagement within community. So increased presence, increased engagement, increased communication, increased participation, increased collaboration. And what we are suggesting is that is, with respect, a very myopic understanding of the relationship that police have with community. Given the historic reality of the experience of especially anti-Black racism, but all kinds of racism at the hands of police, I think that a more productive way of approaching a strategic plan would be to ask the question of, is there a way that less engagement can actually enhance community safety? Because as decisions from the Supreme Court of Canada and human rights organizations have demonstrated to us, is that oftentimes an increase in police presence within community exacerbates fear, anxiety, the feeling of being surveilled, and the impact of over-policing includes the reduction of opportunities either through education or employment. And so I think to have a more, to have a broader and more, I would say, humble acceptance of the reality is to identify and to acknowledge that sometimes less is more, and less police involvement in communities can be a critical tool. It's not the only tool. I'm not saying pull out altogether. I'm saying contextually evaluate the history of a community and the existence of mistrust that may exist as a result of historic racism within a community and their experience with the police. And so it's important to acknowledge that is one tool that can be used to reestablish trust with certain communities. Certainly not all, certain communities.
But I mean, it's also the fact that we say don't take a one-size-fits-all approach to everybody. I think every community has different types of needs. I mean, I can tell you, even in Black communities, like the relationship between policing is extremely different for African Nova Scotians and Halifax, and the Haitians, or in Montreal, and the Nigerians in Winnipeg. So it's a hugely different environment. So I would just say, just be careful in trying to say priority neighborhoods for everybody, and try to do one size fits all.
It's a bit, as a board member, and when I think about building trust or rebuilding trust, it's a bit, your point is a bit confusing. I get it, like I get the less sometimes is better than more, but in one way, to rebuild trust, you need to sit at the table and allow communities to sit at the table and to listen to them and to engage. And then it doesn't necessarily, there's boots on the ground. I don't think that's what was intended. I think it's about all the things you've said, dialogue and engagement and consultation. And I just wonder, I think there was a point where there was less and people said, we want more. And I think that was the spirit of and maybe now, I think over the last 3 years, the police service has done more. And maybe now is the time to take your point and think about, well, we want to ensure it's not performative, and we want to move to other mechanisms to continue that trust and continue to rebuild it. So I think that, if what I recall, that was kind of the spirit of it. My next question is, the organization does a lot of hate crime research. And, I'm curious about the intersection of hate crimes and newcomer demographics, because Peel has a lot of newcomers. And I've read that newcomers, a higher, we've talked, a lot of folks have presented here in previous consultations about underreporting of hate crimes. And I've read that there is a higher degree of underreporting in newcomer demographics because of the fear, the nexus between interacting with police and kind of the unfounded fear of it impacting their immigration status, right? Is there truth in that? Has your research touched on that at all? Is it something that we need to look in further?
I mean, so Stats Canada in their general social service study that was the last one that released, they said, and this number is very, very high, but 233,000 respondents had said that they had faced some type of hate incident or hate crime, out of which 139,000 said it was of a violent nature, out of which 3,000 reported to the police. So, and that's from Stats Canada. directly. So it's hard to say. Like, there's no data that I've seen on newcomer reporting of hate. We did do a small geographically centered survey in Quebec, in particular around communities around reporting of hate, and there was a focus of newcomers in there, and in that we definitely found that to be true. That it's not even so much about like some, we didn't get into the reasons of why they wouldn't report it to the police in terms of their immigration status, but I think it's the fact that they don't know how to, or what it would mean. Like, I think most people don't report to police because they don't know how to, or they don't know that anything's going to come out of it.
Okay. You comment in the report, and you also in your remarks about the IA Pro software that Peel has that would allow for early warning disciplinary tracking system. And I actually recall that, and our senior team is here, but I remember our deputy telling us that software in Peel is being used for early warning signaling of behaviors, police behaviors. I think it's something that we can look at, like, it's an interesting, but I think we are, I don't know to what degree, but it's I just wanted to point that out, something that we as a board can look into and understand better. Your report talks about a board subcommittee of the governance committee, about commissioning a group of experts who would look at our board's policies from the lens of historical data and reporting on those policies, like historical reports. Do you have more to say? Like, how did that idea, has it been done before, or is it an idea you've come up with as a recommendation?
I don't think it's been done before. It's sort of a general best practices when you're attempting to create policy out of data, so a data-driven approach where the effectiveness is continuously being evaluated against data and against the policies that are being implemented in response to that data. So if, for example, if the IA Pro program was transformed and allowed for the input of race-based data and an automatic triggering threshold of percentage stops that are racialized for officers is implemented, and you see how that works for a year, and then you go back and see, does it actually modify behaviors? Because you don't want to just be implementing policies that have no actual effect. And so it's important to revisit the data and measure the success of the policies against the outcomes.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea, because we're actually now studying, as part of our human rights project as a board, we're looking at our board policies from an anti-racism lens. But as a policy, I'm not sure if we're looking at historical reports and data to see if there's an opportunity to, our ED can comment more on that, but I think this is something, I thank you for that recommendation.
And experts, please. Not just community folks. I think experts is what you need.
Yeah, we're using experts today on it, like an expert, but.
And it also allows you to control for confounding factors that appear. So for example, if you, an expert who has a background in statistics or sociology will be able to control for income level, to disaggregate that, or to assess the data, controlling for that will allow you to determine whether income is a more powerful factor that contributes to police encounters than race. And so it allows for you to be more precise in the diagnosis and also in the treatment.
Yeah, thank you for that. Is it okay if a few more questions? The Stats Canada Uniform Crime Reporting Survey you talked about. I was listening and I kind of captured what, how it's recommending a race-based data point. Can you elaborate? Like, I didn't fully understand what Stats Canada is prescribing or recommending.
Yeah, we can, you guys can also jump in too, but so they are introducing a new universal crime reporting system. So and that will then get translated into your records management systems. So your records management systems are your keypads in car and whichever intake you're receiving, and in that will be the opportunity to identify race from the officer perception, as well as from a self-prescribed. So the individual can also self-identify themselves. So with that, we anticipate a plethora of information being coming into the system, because people will then have to get that. So, but that's right now it's at the CECP level, where the CECP has a subcommittee that is looking at how to implement this. Then that subcommittee will then work with the records management systems to implement it. There's a few different municipalities across the country, I think like 14, that are test pilot places. I don't know if Peel is one of them. I'm hoping. Honestly, part of the reason why we're here, we've spent the time to write this report, is because we actually see Peel as a really good opportunity to do innovative work. So we think that identifying these opportunities now, downstream, allows you to then start thinking about, okay, if we know we're going to get all this information in around race, what are the reports the board could ask for in terms of officers, streets, whatever they might be, like how many stops are we getting, how many violent incidents are happening, whatever those could be. But you can actually create accountability and transparency mechanisms through that in advance from that coming up.
Look, you can imagine, Hamid, like, I've had this discussion with some of our senior leadership, the challenges of asking someone for their race in a police interaction. Like that is fundamentally, I think, the obstacle, right? That in itself could marginalize people or stereotype people. I remember I was at a conference recently, I'm gonna side story, but like there was a presentation on this type of stuff, and they were talking about how the presenter was saying how she was of Arab background, right? And she said, I was called in, I was off duty, I was called in to communicate because they had pulled over someone who didn't speak English and said, you're the only person in our service who can speak to them. She arrives and the person is Pakistani and speaks Urdu. And so, either you're gonna ask people or you're gonna rely upon officer assumption, and that will throw the data off. And so, this is the problem.
But you have both.
Yeah.
You can do both with that system. Okay. You can do officer perceived and individual self-identification.
Okay. But thank you. I now understand this UCR. And I'm assuming Peel Police already is part of this UCR. It's just they want to add more data points, because that's how we get national hate crime data, right?
Yes.
The Unified Crime Reporting System has existed for close to 20 years now, but it has modified in different ways. And what Mohammed is referring to is a new set of data sets that will be collected.
Right. Thank you, Chief. Can you, there's a lot of important things that come up in the report, and I'll try to wrap it up quickly. You've had a nationwide lens to policing, as you interact with police across the country. Can you share with us how you view Peel Police and its response to the political context today with Israel-Palestine and protests and hate crimes, and how it's impacting Canadian residents, and how is Peel Police compared to other jurisdictions? What is your view to this whole thing, and how police, whether here locally in general, are responding to this?
That's a loaded question. So, just to kind of give you a bit of a breath. So, ever since October 7th, immediately after October 7th, I met with every single Attorney General, and Minister of Justice and Minister of Public Safety across the country. And we talked about what this could look like in the coming weeks. And since then, we have worked with almost, not all, but many of the hate crimes investigators directly to get a sense of what's happening across the country. So almost per month, if not more so, we've met with hate crimes investigators. My observation, look, I think that accessing hate crimes is not universally an avenue most people find to be a recourse for disputes. First of all, the so resolving disputes, society has many mechanisms, human rights tribunals, workplace grievances, whatever. But the criminal justice system is the most blunt way of dispute resolution. So access to hate incident reporting and hate crimes is not equally available to different types of communities. So, we have seen incidences, so non-persons incidences are about 4-to-1 towards the Jewish community versus the Muslim community. And then, but persons crimes is probably 1-to-1. We've seen that as a general trend across the country, subsiding over time. But that doesn't necessarily say that, like, we know there's huge disparities in terms of which communities report and which ones don't, which ones have organizations that help them report and support that, and which ones don't. Like Black community organizations do not typically go to the police to go get hate crimes reporting. It's just not something that's typically done, or with Indigenous communities, even though we know what's happening with Indigenous communities in many places. So I would say the interesting thing that I would say that Peel's done, and Ish's, Faraz Ismail, your inspector, that's in charge of, or does hate crimes for a long, he's a national leader that is well respected. He made a point to say, we're not going to release data that's immediate versus other police forces that did. And I think that was good, because I think releasing the data when the data is being used for one way or the other was not really responsible, and I think in some ways threw oil on the fire in a way that made some communities feel safer and some communities feel less safe. And I think for policing, particularly, for example, Montreal Police, their communications on this has been, in my opinion, excellent. Other police services have been horrific, and we've spoken to a number of them. Peel has been relatively silent on the whole conflict and I honestly think that's a better approach. Saying less from policing right now is better, even though everybody's trying to get the police to say more. I think that the neutrality of police is sometimes questioned when they do speak too much in moments of high tension like this. So I would say that in terms of policing of protests, communications-wise, I would say Peel Police has done an excellent job.
Thank you, Mohammed, and I wish I had more time to ask you more questions, but I'm out of it. Thank you.
Thank you both for taking the time and coming today. Next, I believe we have another individual who's here in person, Mr. Marwan Mohammed, former advisor of Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, Vienna, Warsaw, Human Rights and Policing. Thank you, Mr. Marwan. So you would just press the red button for speak when you're ready. I want to remind you have 5 minutes, and I'll try and give you a 30-second warning. Thank you.
Thank you. My life is going to be made easier because our friends from CRRF shared most of the remarks and recommendations that initially planned to share with you. I'm here today as mainly a newcomer in the Peel region, having moved from Europe and having worked for the past 10 to 12 years on human rights issues, mainly hate crimes and human rights violations. And my experience as an advisor to the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe has allowed me to work with a number of police forces across Europe at a time where hate crimes were at an all-time peak and targeting very different communities for a variety of reasons and affected by a variety of factors. For those who have a bit of history, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe was initially the international organization through which part of the tensions related to the Cold War were diffused. Basically, you increase diplomatic interactions, you increase exchange of critical military information, and you increase the level of trust. So it was kind of a vector through which tensions at the regional level were diffused, and it include 57 participating states, mainly Europe, Central Asia, and North America. But when the Cold War was eventually diffused, the purpose was now to achieve peace. And achieving peace was a challenge at a time where the far right was increasing in influence, mainly in Europe. And so they came up with this idea that there is a notion of security that could be extended at the individual level. That's the human dimension of security. In other terms, you cannot achieve security at a societal level if individuals do not feel safe. In simple terms, this is the OSCE's framework for human rights work. But the advantage with this concept is that it puts security and fundamental freedoms within the same equation. If I look at police forces all across the world, the way they are built is that structurally the main work is geared toward addressing threats, violence, hate crimes, security incidents. And human rights come later on when this has a negative impact or where there is like incidents in which race plays or in which human rights violations occur at the hands of police officers, then legitimately communities complain, civil public opinion is expressed, and then we come and say, hey, we have to do something about this human rights violation. But in essence, from an operational perspective, human rights come as a constraint. They come as something that we need to be careful about. They do not come as something that is embedded in our work. So for me, this notion that security and fundamental freedom, security and the respect, full respect of human rights for every citizen need to come together, this has to be embedded. And not only kind of a quarterly, annual, every 4-year review of how we are doing. No, it has to be embedded into the work. And I will be able, during maybe the questions, to share a few examples how this could be done to some extent. But I wanted to share maybe 3 key recommendations that could help the panel. The first one is an informed use of data. Some of this data is already available in the systems. Some of it could be available. The examples that have been shared show how markers, racial markers, could help inform the behavior and maybe incentivize the behavior of some officers, because just the fact that you have to record it, just the fact that you know that you are going to be accountable for it, plays into the way you approach the relationship with the citizen. And this informed use of data makes the difference between noise and signal. So if you do not make sense of the data, this is plainly noise. You have loads of data, computers, databases, but you are not able to make sense of it, neither from a human rights perspective or from a crime-solving perspective. So if you are able to make sense of the data, we're talking about making the difference between causality and causation, having a sense of data literacy at the police level, then you are able to utilize it in an efficient manner. Second, a relationship of genuine trust. So being invited to conferences is one thing, having a channel through which communities work with the police is another. Being informed at a substantial level of the current threats, of the current issues, of the current dynamics of crime in the region, helps communities be useful, take part in a conversation in an informed way, and not only when something bad happens. Last but not least, a holistic and unified approach to security. And for that, of course, you will need regular, frequent reviews of the work that is done. And then, usually people leave at this stage. What is most important is the implementation, follow-up of these recommendations. Because once you have like major report, whether it be from the human rights ombudsperson or whether it be from human rights NGOs or external advisor and observers, it's one thing. But then to turn this into actionable measures, operational recommendations that actually produce change, that's another story. And that's where I think most police forces are lacking when they have already initially the good intention of doing better and making better. I will leave it at that and take maybe some questions.
I'll turn it over to my fellow board members. Mr. Carby?
Thanks for the presentation. You present a model of what policing should look like with a human rights perspective embedded. And these are recommendations that clearly you are putting forward for PRP. Can you identify some cases where this has been successfully implemented and have helped to improve community safety and well-being?
Yes, of course. So I will take maybe two. Of course, I cannot share the country because this is covered by confidentiality, but maybe a couple examples. One, the policing of demonstrations. So if you look at a number of European countries, I'm not talking about like Central Asian and Eastern Europe because it's another story where demonstrations are usually criminalized according to political alignment and so on. But let's say we look at Western European countries, Southern European countries, in the way demonstrations are held, policed. The more the organizers are involved in the policing strategy, the better it happens, the better it occurs. So for instance, a country has a desk dedicated to the preparation of demonstrations. They help the organizer plan the itinerary of some of the demonstrations. They take on board like the key issues that the demonstrators are planning to ask for or campaign about. And they are as supportive as possible in the organization to take into account the possible threats. I'll take a few examples. You are looking at a demonstration against racism, and you know that some far-right elements are going to come and provoke, are going to come and even sometimes infiltrate the demonstration to create a number of incidents because they know that if there are incidents in this type of demonstration, the next demonstration of the same type will be sometimes banned, sometimes policed in a much harder, more visible way. So when they started putting this desk in place, every demonstration that got through was able to take place successfully. And in reverse, the police would say, "Hey, we have these concerns that we want to make sure you take on board. How do we make sure that we are almost invisible in the demonstration? Would you like us to train some of your teams so that you handle and you identify the threats before we even get there?" And so this policing and this interaction embedded where security and human rights, in other terms, in this case, rights of demonstration, freedom of expression, they interact in one and the same operation, which is the interaction between the organizers and the police desk in charge of this. Another example is related to financial criminality. So basically, you have a number of fraud at a high level, and the more the system is liberal in terms of finance and access to finance, the higher and the easier it is to create fraud around the credit cards and means of payment. And so some NGOs related to customer associations, users of bank services, got together with police forces, and they worked together over a period of 6 months to identify the ways through which identity is stolen and these means of payment are misused against the interest of customers. So instead of looking at individual incidents of fraud and just like being the witness unable to find the source of this criminality, they came together with the users and worked together to prevent next occurrences. And it's been able to reduce by 37% the rate at which this type of criminality occurred in that region. So these are two examples.
Yes. So your first example spoke primarily to demonstrations happening in a safe way, which integrates human rights, of course, in the organizing of it. But I would say the data also supports that increased numbers of demonstration also increases apprehension and the feeling from community of feeling not safe. So whether the protest was safe or not, the number of protests that keeps happening also impacts people's sense of safety? Do you have any kind of data that supports that, as long as it's happening safely, community feels safe, or their sense of anxiety still goes up because of the number of demonstrations that's happening?
Yes, so you found that there were less demonstrations. They were much bigger, much more organized, but less frequent. Of course, some part of it because they were more conducive to change or being heard. But the fact that you have an event that is well organized, even like families felt safe, sending children, going as a family to the demonstration, instead of feeling like, okay, what is going to happen? We don't know if there is going to be violence. Then, of course, even in terms of like taking on board some of the concerns and some of the questions from other communities or other groups, this helped identify maybe some itineraries that were making other communities safer. And I'm going to be like really practical about it. The demonstration I'm talking about were related specifically to hate crimes against either Muslim minorities, Roma minorities, Black minorities in these countries. And you would find that to some extent, some of the complaints about the demonstrations, when you look at them in details, they were misplaced. And some of them were even like utilized politically. I'll take an example. A Roma demonstration in a Central European country, when it occurred, some groups said that, okay, this is making us really anxious because we know that these communities create a number of incidents and all that. We feel threatened, we feel insecure that this itinerary is going to go through this downtown area. But when you look at who activates and who agitates this discomfort about Roma demonstrating or Black communities demonstrating, they were usually overrepresented from the far right. So I'm not saying that this is misplaced as a general concern. I'm saying what you tend to see is that the more they are organized, the safer they are, the wider they are, the less they are in terms of demonstration. Second, the concerns that are expressed about said demonstration need to be investigated to see, okay, if there is merit to this concern, is it based on actual facts, or is it just a political claim that I really feel insecure about people demonstrating for their rights? What does it say about me?
Great, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Atia.
Thank you for those examples. Mr. Mohammed, you talked about informed data, right? And where Peel Police has been doing a lot of work around collecting data and improving based on data and reform. Can you give us some examples, just like you did with Len's question, some examples of how informed data led to change in a particular police jurisdiction?
Yes. So in a country, there has been, like in this country, racial data is forbidden. So you cannot collect data based on race, even voluntarily. Okay? So for a long time, NGOs have been campaigning saying, hey, we know that you racially profile us. At least if we have data, we can prove it. And it will provide a political incentive, at least to justify yourselves. So this was a huge no-no. And the sole fact that you claim that as an Arab, as an Asian, as a Black person, potentially you're a target for police bias, this in and of itself would be deemed as an attack on said republic. So eventually, a group of NGOs and academics and human rights observer came up with their own system for collecting data. They just sat in the major station in the most important cities and observed police behavior and police control and police checks of travelers within these stations. And they found that Black young men traveling in these stations faced six times more chances of being stopped by the police. If they were young North African youth, they were exposed to 8 times more chance of being controlled by the police. So this data eventually was collected and validated by the National Human Rights Council, And it provided a huge incentive, at least to be accountable for it, at least to effect change. We're like miles and thousands of miles away, even like figuratively speaking, from what is happening. And the numbers that were shown by Omar Zia earlier about like the level of trust or mistrust in relation to the police, of course, this is a source of concern, but comparatively, we're night and day in comparison with some European countries. So I don't want this to be taken as a compliment, just as a relative difference. But you see how one data provides the sufficient incentive for political change, and how one feature in the system, in terms of evaluation and accountability, can incentivize the police officer or the clerk or any person at an individual level to say, hey, at some point, I'm going to be accountable for this. So when I'm interacting with someone, how do I behave? What is significant? Is it like the behavior and the criminal behavior, or is it the color or the supposed religion of the person? This in and of itself shows how like the potentiality of data, even before being collected, produce already a number of changes in the behavior and in the way we conduct business at an everyday level.
My last question. You sent, thank you for sending your remarks beforehand. In your last recommendation, you say that a more long-term and structural approach is needed, which can inform the way police leadership can affect change step by step. Is there an example that you've seen? I mean, our leadership team has been driving change for the last few years, and we're seeing the benefits of that across the service. But do you have an example of a jurisdiction where the leadership took on a particularly type of change, or and the benefits were shown?
Yes. I'm a statistician, so I tend to focus on like number and systems and the way like this variable interacts with another. What I see, if I compare 57 states, is that if you want change to happen, you have different avenues. You have like the most palatable avenue, which is like political signaling and political pressure. We demand change as communities. We identify this as a problem. We give you the responsibility and the duty to make everything possible to affect change. The other one is that you have less of a political opportunity, or you have already explored this. So now you come to the implementation phase. And even in terms of implementation, for me, this is the biggest opportunity for a system, for a police system like the Peel police system. Why? Because the intention is already there. Leadership already accepts the idea that we need to do better. We need to improve the way we do things. So now, in terms of implementation, that's where the actual change can happen. And when I say implementation, I'm not talking only about the leadership. I'm talking about like everyday police officer level. What is the incentive of a genuine, sincere, well-meaning, professional police officers to do better? And the only way you can really affect this is either through systemic change, new IT system, new database system, new computer system that affect change, new HR system, new policies, new law, or by providing simple cases where you can do security and you can respect human rights at the same time. You can increase the level of objective security, reducing threats and incidents of violence, and at the same time increase the level of trust and the quality of the relationship you have with people. The more you invest in that, the lesser the level of crime, the easier it is for them to report and help you and identify cases where you can actually make a change. Last comment. If I take a map of the Peel region, this map needs to be much more complex than a geographical map. You have a geographical map of the Peel region. You have a community map. Who do I speak to regarding what community for what? What are the sensitivities? What are the expectations? What are the dynamics within this community? Mohammed earlier took the example of Black communities' relationship to police. Not the same in Montreal. Not the same for Nigerian, not the same for Haitian. So this map needs to be already extremely complex in terms of mapping communities, then mapping criminalities, different form of criminalities. Is it related to movement, in which case it's going to be like related to highways and in following these maps, and then maps of where our actual effort is. So for instance, in 2025, we want to focus on road criminality. Of course, this work needs to be informed by the data that we've observed in the past few years. So my recommendation, and I will leave it there, is that maybe we increase the level of complexity through which we look at the data. Data related to criminality, data related to communities, data related to social and economic background across the region, and really learn not only from the existing data, but also plan for the data that is missing and that we want to collect in the future. And this needs to increase overall the level of data literacy and data activism, not only at a senior level, but also at every level of the hierarchy. Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming down and taking time. I believe our last presenter is virtual. It's Mr. Larry Haven. He's from the Independent Jewish Voices.
Hello.
Hi, Larry. Thank you for being here today. I just want to let you know you have 5 minutes, and I'll try and give you a 30-second warning. Thank you.
Sure, thank you. Okay, I guess I should introduce myself. I am the Jewish son of a survivor of the Auschwitz concentration camp. I'm a founder of Independent Jewish Voices, which is a grassroots organization opposing all forms of racism and advocating for justice and peace for all in Israel and Palestine. I've helped deliver IJV's workshops on anti-Semitism to numerous groups over the past 5 years. I wanted to tell you that horror among Jews, especially younger Jews, at the ongoing carnage of Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank since October the 7th has led to a huge influx to the ranks of our organization and similar Jewish groups around the world. Thousands of Jews are demonstrating against these events, fed up with the moral blackmail that the ticket to Jewish identity is blind support of Israel, especially with the Gaza death toll now about 30,000, half of them children. A great lie is that all Jews support Israel's actions and that criticism of Israel is therefore anti-Semitic. Can you move to slide 3? Sorry. Jewish communities are extremely diverse, especially politically. For example, in a 2023 ECO survey of Canadian Jews, remind you that's before October 7th, 60% said that the Israeli government is moving in the wrong direction. 54% opposed expanding Israeli settlements in the West Bank. 31% wanted establishment Jewish organizations like Sija, B'nai B'rith, Friends of Simon Wiesenthal to be more critical of Israel. A 2018 ECOS poll of Canadian Jews showed 60% did not see criticism of Israel as anti-Semitic, and half believed that accusations of anti-Semitism are, quote, often used to silence legitimate criticism of Israeli policies. So when Jewish establishment organizations say they alone speak for Jews, please do not believe them. If a police force takes actions that offend charter rights of expression or assembly based on advice by those claiming to speak for all Jews, then that police force could risk damages incurred, legal, financial, and reputational. So what is anti-Semitism then? Well, here's what it's not. Anti-Semitism is not criticism of Israel. It's not even harsh criticism of Israel. Here's what anti-Semitism is, if you can move to slide 5. In the eloquent words of the 2021 Jerusalem Declaration, sorry, if you can move to slide 5. And the next slide. Yeah. Anti-Semitism, in their words, and this is put together by over 300 top global scholars of Jewish studies, anti-Semitism, and the Holocaust. Anti-Semitism is discrimination, prejudice, hostility, or violence against Jews as Jews. It is racist to essentialize, that is, to treat a character trait as inherent or make sweeping negative generalizations about a given population. What is true of racism in general is true of anti-Semitism in particular. Next slide. British historian Stephen Beller says, accusations of anti-Semitism are very powerful because as soon as you label someone anti-Semitic, you can dismiss them or their arguments as irrational, as insane, and hence they don't have to be taken seriously, or alternatively have to be taken extremely seriously as a threat not only to Jews but to the whole of society. If you call someone an anti-Semite, you are in effect associating them with the Holocaust. That is the nuclear option of political rhetoric. Now, so pervasive is that slander that hundreds of people worldwide and in Canada since October 7th have been called out, canceled, shut down, suspended, fired, blacklisted, and doxxed, many for simply signing a petition. In short, it's a campaign of nothing less than civil terror. Organizations like B'nai B'rith would have us believe anti-Semitism in Canada is spiraling out of control. Next slide. But its numbers are not to be trusted. Compare its 2021 anti-Semitism incidents in Canada to those compiled by its sister organization in the United States, the Anti-Defamation League. B'nai B'rith's claims show proportionally 20 times as many anti-Semitic incidents in Canada as in the US. How could that be, given that the same Anti-Defamation League in its annual survey of global anti-Semitic attitudes has consistently ranked Canada as among the least anti-Semitic countries in the world?
My apologies, Larry. I just want to let you know you have 30 seconds. Thank you.
Okay. And one reason for these B'nai B'rith statistics is they're using the largely discredited International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, or IRA, definition of anti-Semitism, where 7 of the 11 examples involve criticism of Israel. So, no surprise. Is the incidence of anti-Semitism actually rising? Well, it has been on the rise for several years, but not independently. Rather commensurate with a rise in white nationalism that targets anti-Black racism, anti-Indigenous racism, and Islamophobia. So my last remarks are that privileging efforts to combat discrimination against only one group marginalizes all the other targeted groups and undermines solidarity and cooperation. Everything has to be part of the larger struggle. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Larry. Do we have any comments or questions?
Thank you for your presentation. Just a few thoughts. I mean, I'm trying to grasp the presentation, and you know, I appreciate you're trying to, you know, you're distinguishing between what is anti-Semitism, what is not. I often think about that as a Muslim as to what is Islamophobia and what is not, and I think it's a growing kind of space that is being, communities are trying to understand to ensure that these things are not, not leveraged, right? Especially with policing. Like I recently, was privy to from the community a case where a lady claimed she was attacked because she was Muslim, and I think the end outcome was not necessarily from a community perspective. When all of the information was on the table, the community understood that this was not Islamophobic, it was a confrontation between two people, and then Islamophobia was being used to drive, police act in a certain way. So I appreciate what you're talking about, even from my own community, but there are still many cases of hate crimes against Jews because they are Jews that we see within our local jurisdictions and just as other communities. And my question to you is, just building on your presentation, often, I know we've heard and I understand the reporting of hate crimes is even as much as underreported. We hear it from the Muslim community; it's extremely underreported. We also know it's underreported within the Jewish community. But the Jewish community has had far more experience working with police, and developing systems or mechanisms or relationships to and within the police and with their community, educating their community. So my question to you, with all that said, is what can the police learn as successful models? What can we take away as a successful model that you've seen in the Jewish community, that other communities can build on to educate their own and support their own in reporting hate crimes to police?
Well, the Jewish community is an old and mature community in Canada, and it has a lot of self-confidence. It has done very well in Canada, and one of the things that is very strong sort of establishment organizations which encourage Jews to complain about many real, but some perceived instances of anti-Semitism. They deserve credit for carefully curating that reporting to police. And you're right, Jews tend not to fear the police nowadays, and especially in Canada. But it's also true that among other populations that may be newer to Canada, that may have more confrontations with the police, that have more to fear from the police, they're going to be much more hesitant to report incidents of hate crime to the police. So, of course, the stats pile up in favor of the groups that are more assiduous in reporting.
My last question, I was, reading an article about, and I think it's what you're trying to talk about, leveraging certain, certain incidents to influence police action on. Is this, I'm trying to understand, like, when you're talking about what's anti-Semitic, what's not. Is this, are there examples of this? I mean, as I said, like Islamophobia, I've seen it. Are there examples of this? And how should police work with communities to distinguish, like, between what is legitimately something and what is not? Who are the go-to? Because it's an interaction between communities and the leadership of communities, working with the leadership of police to distinguish these things.
Well, just as I was waiting to speak, I was writing down 5 or 6 examples. I'm not going to give them all where police overreacted to accusations of anti-Semitism. But the most recent in Toronto, there was a pro-Gaza demonstration, a rally that marched down University Avenue. There was a fellow that calls himself Spider-Man, and he was jumping up on lampposts and hoardings all along the route. He happened to also jump up on a hoarding in front of the Mount Sinai Hospital, which was founded by Jews. And immediately, Jewish organizations said, "Oh, that's anti-Semitism." And now the police are saying that they're going to give special protection to the Mount Sinai Hospital. But I'm not even sure that this fellow realized that he jumped up on the hoarding in front of a Jewish hospital. Or, for example, in Halifax, a number of years ago, the police got an injunction against an anti-vaxxing, anti-masking rally during COVID. And then they used that injunction to also shut down a pro-Palestinian car rally that was completely safe. Everybody was in their cars. Or in Calgary, the police arrested a guy because he was chanting from the river to the sea, "Palestine will be free." I don't know whether that's gone. I don't think it would be, the prosecution will be successful. But again and again, Canadian police are overreacting. And maybe they're learning not to, maybe they're being more cautious now in taking their advice from the establishment Jewish organizations. But they have to beware that they're very often being gamed.
Thank you so much Larry, for coming in and giving a deputation. I think that concludes our sessions today. I want to thank all the presenters for taking time to come out. We're here to listen, and we value your presentations very much and your time. We will be having more of these throughout the year. Details and dates will be available as well. So thank you so much, and we hope to see other presenters. Thank you so much.